Welcome to TWT Talks with Tito. This is Tito Medrano, back for another episode, back in your live. So today we're going to talk about the top 4 UFC welterweight champions of all time. Yes, we're going to talk about the UFC welterweight division. As you can tell, the UFC welterweight division right now is it's uncertain, I would say. Jack Della Maddalena is a new UFC welterweight champion representing Australia. Australia beat Bilal Muhammad. With that being said, a guy in the UFC lightweight division has vacated the belt, Islam Makhachev. And this is what I forgot to talk about in my previous episode. He's going to go up in weight, and he's possibly going to get the title shot. And I'm a little shocked because I didn't see anybody getting the title shot before Shavkat Ramadan. But it seems like he's dealing with some injuries that he's not ready to either get into a training camp or not recover yet, whatever it is. But everything is pointing that Islam Makhachev is going to get the title shot against Jack Della Maddalena. We talked, you guys heard Dana White in the press conference. If Bilal would have won, they probably would have had Islam defending the belt against Iliad. If Jack won, the possibilities of Islam going up weight were very high, and that's exactly what happened. The welterweight division, there's a lot of rising contenders. Sean Brady's also knocking on the door. We saw the impressive win he had over Leon Edwards. So that guy's also up there. Not too long ago, Morales made a statement against Gilbert Burns. So, this division is getting really, really hot right now. A lot of contenders are coming up. Ian Gary Machado is always in that conversation. Let's not forget Joaquin Buckley will be fighting former UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman. So the welterweight division is very, very, very hot right now. It's, if now that Islam is going up weight and possibly getting the title shot to be a 2-division champion, things got a lot interesting in this division. Also, another fight announcement. We know that Islam just vacated the belt. Ilia Topuria will be facing Charles Oliveira for the vacate UFC lightweight champion. So that's going to be an international fight week. And man, that fight's going to be very interesting to see. We know Ilia Topuria believes that Islam did not want to fight him. I don't believe in that. I just believe Islam just wants to make history. And Ilia as well wants to make history. We know he vacated the UFC featherweight title to go up to the lightweight division. He's going to face the former UFC lightweight champion, Charles Oliveira, so that's going to be interesting. Also, I do want to announce, Chicago, we're getting an event, August 16th. The UFC middleweight champion, Dricus du Plessis, will face the number 1 contender, and a lot of people believe he should have fought for the belt a long time ago, Hamza Chimaev. Oh, man, this main event is exciting. It's great. Back in Chicago after 6 years, back to the United Center. It's about damn time. What took you guys so long to come back to Chicago? Thank you for coming back to Chicago and bringing this big fight. I'm excited to see how they're going to stack this fight card up because it's going to be crazy. You guys got to give us like a crazy, crazy, crazy fight card. From the bottom to the top, whatever it is, just give us something good. But yeah, it's going to be exciting to see that. That fight's going to be exciting to watch. But yeah, with that being said, let's talk about the top 4 UFC welterweight champions of all time. Coming in at number 4, Tyron Woodley, the chosen one. Look, regardless of how you feel about Tyron Woodley, regardless of how his career ended with the UFC, you can't deny the guy was one of those UFC champions that did what he did. 4 title defense. You don't get 4 title defense by accident. Obviously, Tyron Woodley was not the favorite as far as someone you look back in history and you're like, that was my favorite UFC welterweight champion. You're not going to say that very often. But the thing is, Tyron Woodley, you got to remember that when he lost to Rory McDonald, I was like, he's not going to fight for the belt. That's what I thought personally, because Rory McDonald was Rory McDonald at the time. I didn't think he would. I was like, he's definitely not going to fight for the belt anytime soon. But, when he beat Robbie Lawler and he finished him, I was like, okay. And prior to finishing Robbie Lawler, he beat Koscheck, former UFC title contender, beat Carlos Conde, former UFC interim champion. So, he beat the tough guys to get where he was at. Knocked out Robbie Lawler, who was at the time considered the boogeyman. I didn't think Robbie Lawler would lose the belt anytime soon, especially after the wars that he had with Rory McDonald and Carlos Conde. He did that. Then he defended the belt against Wonderboy at UFC 205, which arguably was probably one of the best UFC championship fights that I've seen. As far as, I think that fight would, I think if I ever do a fight, if I ever do like a list of the best UFC welterweight fights, championship fights, that would probably be in the list. A lot of people thought Wonderboy did enough to win that fight. I personally thought he did enough to win that fight. Obviously, they could do the rematch at UFC 209. That fight was not exciting, but I'll go on the record and say it here at TWT Talks with Tito. I think Wonderboy did enough to win that fight too. The only thing is that, Woodley did drop him. But nevertheless, I feel like he did enough to win. And after that, he fought Damian Maia at UFC 214. That card was stacked, by the way. I remember that card like Southern California and Anaheim. It's crazy. Main event was Jones versus Daniel Cormier 2, which obviously that fight got overturned. But nevertheless, this was one of the title fights that were in there. It was Woodley versus Damian Maia. Damian Maia wasn't his first time fighting for a belt. He fought Anderson Silva, and that fight went horrible. But this fight was not any different. A lot of people did not like the fact that Tyron Woodley was not looking for the finish. He stuffed a lot of takedowns, but he was not looking for the kill. And I feel like Tyron Woodley started getting heat, started getting like people were just not a fan of him at all. And then after that, prior to, he started talking about possibly defending the belt against Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, and people just wanted to see him fight contenders. A lot of people were vouching for him to get stripped from the belt. I think he even had issues with Dana White at one point, and then, yeah. But here's where I really appreciated Tyron Woodley's title run. When he faced Darren Till. Darren Till was a tough, undefeated prospect at the time from Liverpool, England. Yeah, before there was a Paddy Pimblett, there was Darren Till. Darren Till was the originator of Liverpool, not Paddy Pimblett. Sorry, kids, for those that don't know who Darren Till is. But Darren Till was the originator from fighting out of Liverpool. And I strongly believe that we might have a new UFC champion. Not that I was doubting Tyron Woodley. It's just Darren Till looked really good. Despite the fact that he only fought Cowboy and he fought somebody else. Cowboy Cerrone was the biggest name that he beat during that time. But I was like, what? I think Darren Till can possibly beat Tyron Woodley. And that would shift the direct. Oh, no. Let's not forget that Darren Till also beat Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson as well. So, though, Wonderboy and Cowboy were the biggest names that he beat prior to fighting Tyron Woodley for the belt. But the thing is, what I liked about Tyron Woodley in this fight, and I say this is my favorite Tyron Woodley fight, not just because I'm saying it, and I also think this is the best version of Tyron Woodley during that time. Tyron Woodley went in there with a chip on his shoulder, knowing that people were rooting against him. People really wanted him to lose. And he went in there and he put Darren Till away and made a statement letting everybody know, I'm not losing this belt anytime soon. That was Darren Till's first loss. And Tyron Woodley was just like, yeah, I'm staying here for a while. And that was Tyron Woodley's last title defense. Because then after that, he lost the belt to Kamaru Usman, who arguably became one of the best welterweights of all time. And it's sad because Tyron Woodley, after losing to Kamaru Usman, he was just not the same fighter anymore. Then he lost to Gilbert Burns by decision. Then, he fought Kobe Covington, who he was scheduled to fight. And obviously, Kobe Covington fought RDA for the interim belt because Tyron was not physically ready to fight him. So that's another criticism that Tyron Woodley got also during his run as champion. But he lost that fight by TKO. I think his rib cracked at the middle of the fight. And then after that, he lost to Vicente Luque, got submitted. And then from there, the UFC said, you know what? We're cutting ties with you. You're released. Which is shocking to see. I thought they were going to give him probably one or two more opportunities. But no, the UFC said, we cut ties with you. We wish you the best in your future, and you're out. Former UFC welterweight champion who defended the belt 4 times got released like that after going on a 4-fight losing streak. And we know that he went on a winning streak prior to winning the belt and then after winning the belt. So, yeah. But we can't deny what Tyron Woodley did for this division. He, like I said, you don't get 4 title defense by accident, especially in the UFC welterweight division. So, with that being said, Tyron Woodley comes in at number 4 at TWT Talks with Tito, the best UFC welterweight champions of all time. All right, coming in at number 3. And this guy can possibly be number 2 if we're being honest. 2-time UFC welterweight champion, UFC Hall of Famer, Matt Hughes. Look, Matt Hughes, when I started watching the UFC, he wasn't the champion anymore, but I would go back and watch old fights of Matt Hughes, and I would say, man, this guy was amazing. He was considered a wrestler, but he was not your typical wrestler. He can strike, he can submit, and Matt Hughes, he was one of the, before there was a George St. Pierre, before there was a Kamaru Usman, Matt Hughes arguably was considered the best welterweight of all time. This guy won the belt twice. His first run, he had 5 title defense. Then he lost it to BJ Penn. And then his second run, he won the vacay belt against then George St. Pierre. A young George St. Pierre submitted him and had 4 title defense. And let me tell you one thing. Matt Hughes, my favorite Matt Hughes fight is when he beat Frank Trigg. Because he was losing that fight and then he submitted. And I think even Dana White went on the record saying that's my favorite UFC fight of all time. Matt Hughes was one of those guys that, and like I said, I didn't watch UFC during the time that he was champion. I went back and watched his old fights. But those fans that started watching Matt Hughes when he was the UFC champion, I'm sure they will appreciate this. He was just one of a kind when it came to a fighter. He was a competitor. He would fight anybody, anywhere. And part of the Miletich camp, which, Pat Miletich, the first ever UFC welterweight champion, he had him. He had Robbie Lawler, Tim Sylvia, Jeremy Horn. He had all those guys back in the day. And these guys lived in Iowa, and they were just training, Midwest tough guys. And, Matt Hughes being from the Chicago area, we know how proud of a Midwest guy he is. And he's one of those guys that put the Midwest in the map. And I think he was probably the first guy to, I could be wrong, but I think he would, the first UFC welterweight champion was Pat Miletich. He's from Iowa. So Pat was the first guy, I believe, unless somebody else from a different weight division won the belt before Pat did. But, he was one of the very few guys from the Midwest to represent the Midwest in the high standard. But if you look at Matt Hughes, the guys that he beat, Frank Trigg, George St. Pierre the first time, BJ Penn, Carlos Newton when he slammed him and he won the UFC belt the first time, and then also the guys that he beat when he wasn't fighting for the belt, like Matt Serra. He beat Hoist Gracie. Yes, it wasn't the Hoist Gracie from UFC 1, 2, and 3, but he beat him. And Matt Hughes is that guy that rightfully so deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And yeah, a lot of guys looked up to him. George St. Pierre, BJ Penn, and Matt Hughes. He has to be top 2, top 3 greatest welterweight of all time, because I feel like he's the guy that set the standard high for the UFC welterweight division, for the UFC welterweight championship. He's the guy that pretty much put that belt on the map. I know there is a Pat Miletich, but Matt Hughes was the guy that made that belt mainstream. There was a Matt Hughes era, and because of that, guys like George St. Pierre, guys like BJ Penn, guys like, that were fighting during that time stepped up their game because they know they have to beat the guy named Matt Hughes at the time. All right. And he comes in at number 3. Coming in at number 2. It's no secret. The Nigerian Nightmare, Kamaru Usman. Look, it's really hard for me to put Kamaru over Matt Hughes, but there's a reason why. Matt Hughes, as great as he was, because he was great. The division was not as talented as it was with Kamaru Usman and the current roster that it is now. I'm just being honest. Kamaru Usman, slowly but surely, was climbing the ladders, beat Leon Edwards before winning the belt the first time, beat Damian Maia, beat Rafael Dos Anjos, beat Sean Strickland, beat a lot of tough guys to get where he was at. Then when he fought Tyron Woodley, I thought this was going to be a very competitive fight because, Tyron Woodley has that wrestling background with that power, that one-hit power knockout. But Kamaru Usman, on paper, showed that he was the better wrestler, that he had the better IQ, and that he was going to take Tyron Woodley on deep waters. And that's exactly what he did. And that's exactly how he won the UFC welterweight champion, by pure domination. Then after that, Kamaru Usman fought Colby Covington the first time, which I thought that was probably one of the best welterweight fights during that time. As I talked about Woodley and Wonderboy, that fight was also amazing. That was his first title defense. Then after that, he defended the belt against Jorge Masvidal. Jorge took the fight late, 1 week notice, like a week. Because originally it was going to be Burns, and Burns got COVID. This was during the COVID days. And yeah. Then after that, he beat him by decision the first time. Then he fought Gilbert Burns. And he beat Gilbert Burns by TKO. I think it was the second or third round, I believe. And, Gilbert Burns was considered one of the toughest guys during that time. Then he did a rematch with Masvidal, which he knocked out Masvidal in the rematch and sealed the deal there. And then after that, he defended the belt for the fifth time against Colby Covington. And that fight was grueling too. It was another classic between both guys, and he beat Colby Covington by decision. And then after that, he lost the belt to Leon Edwards, which a fight that he was winning in the rematch. This was the rematch, which he beat Leon Edwards before these guys became the big names that they were. He beat him in the rematch. Leon beat him in the rematch because, Usman beat him in the first fight. Head kick knockout in the fifth round. And, Leon was losing that fight 3-1, I believe. I strongly believe that. And then after that, got a rematch with Leon in the trilogy, lost that fight, and then fought Hamza Shemaya on probably I didn't even think he had a full training camp when he fought him. And 3 rounds, he fought him in the middleweight division, lost that fight. And Usman will be back to fight Joaquin Buckley. So, Kamaru Usman is considered by Dana White the greatest welterweight champion of all time. Not at all. And Dana White, if you ever listened to this episode, which you probably won't, you probably will, I'm telling you right now, Kamaru Usman is not the greatest welterweight of all time. He is not even close. And I don't say this by all means. I don't say this in a disrespectful manner. I'm just saying for someone that's been watching the sport for a long time, and like I said, I didn't watch Matt Hughes when he was champion, but I went back and saw his greatest moments. There's no way you're going to say Kamaru Usman is the greatest welterweight champion of all time. Not even close. But I'll give you this. Since Usman lost the belt, Leon defended it twice against him and against Kobe, and then he lost it to Bilal, and then Bilal lost it to Jack Della Maddalena. So that belt hasn't been defended as much as Usman, but he is definitely not number one. You know who number one is, Dana. You know who number one is. Coming in number one. It's no secret who number one is. You guys, he was number one in my GOAT list. He's going to be number one in the UFC welterweight division of greatest welterweights of all time as far as champions goes. The great George St. Pierre, the former 2-time UFC champion, the UFC welterweight champion, the UFC Hall of Famer, and the guy that defended the UFC title 9 times. So yeah, that is the greatest UFC champion of all time. I can go on and say, some people are going to say that, Usman had better competition when he was champion. You can probably say that, but at the same time, look who George St. Pierre beat. Matt Hughes twice, BJ Penn twice, Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit, Dan Hardy, Josh Koscheck. I mean, should I go on? Frank Trigg. And he didn't even beat Frank Trigg for the... He didn't even defend the belt against Frank Trigg. Johnny Hendricks was, yeah, I get it. It was a controversial decision. Johnny should have probably won that fight, but he was in PEDs. Let's not forget that. And, yeah, and he did that. He defended the belt 9 times. Not only that, he came back after 4 years and won the UFC middleweight belt. So, like, I'm trying to understand. Oh, beat Jake Shields too. That's another fight that another name that he beat during his title defense. Koscheck twice. Yeah, he beat Koscheck twice. So, like, I get that Kamaru Usman, he was that dude when he was the champion. But honestly, there's no way you're going to put him over Georges St. Pierre. There's definitely no way you're going to do that. It's just like, come on. Like, seriously? Like, really? Georges St. Pierre is the greatest welterweight of all time. Not even close. Not even close at all. And yeah, he is number one. And I can go on and say why he's number one. But, you know, it's just facts. It's facts, Dana. It's facts. And that's the reality. And yeah. That is my top 4 UFC welterweight champions of all time. Let's not forget next week, WWE Saturday night main event. They already stacked it up with Jey Uso versus Logan Paul, Braun Breaker, Seth Rollins versus CM Punk, and Sami Zayn. Also, I think, Drew McIntyre versus Damian Priest, and there was another match that they announced. I can't think of it on top of my head right now. But I will have it done. I can't think about it on top of my head right now, but it will be. I will have it done. I will talk about it next week. I can't think about that other match they announced. So they announced 4 matches so far for Saturday night main event. And we'll see. Yeah, we'll talk about that more next week. But yeah, so that is my list for the top 4 UFC welterweight champions of all time. Did you guys agree? Did you guys disagree? Comment below on the Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe. Follow the Instagram page as well. And yeah, with that being said, guys, this is Tito Medrano. This is TWT Talks with Tito. And remember, we are dropping episodes every week. And if we don't drop them right away, we're definitely going to drop them. And yeah, with that being said, guys, thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.